world today. Your walk, your style, and the words that you say. It's a new world, you say. Changed. Men hate men, and that hasn't changed. Nations rise against nations, and that hasn't changed. And men still turn away from God, and you tell me, brother, it's a new world today.
Well, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed our unintentionally broody, minor chorded intro music. But
it's never happened before.
No, but unintentionally brooding minor chord intro music should be the sub headline to our podcast, more than likely. So it's Presbycast. Comments already saying that was dreadful. So we're on a good track record so far.
Well, it feels like an old time show with the technical difficulties and the late start. It just feels like it's going to be a good old time Presbycast, like the ones we used to know.
At least one person on the show has had some internet issues, plus potential sickness. I mean, it's just no one else can make a plane fly in the air quite like us.
Yep. Well, welcome to Total Depravity Live, one of our many nicknames. So we're here to talk about something old, something new, something Baptist, something. I shouldn't say Jew but that would be, people love, that's all anyone wants to talk about anymore, but we won't say that. So we're joined, we used to have this segment called Fun with Baptist, and we mostly made fun of the IFB guys, but then they quit being funny, and the people that really were kind of putting those things together, they sort of quit being funny too. Everybody got angry a few years ago, and but we're going to have fun with a Baptist, and with, quite frankly, Dr. Hart, you grew up as a fundamentalist Baptist, did you not?
I did. So
I don't know if Caleb, Bob, do you go by Bob or your given name? Oh, we got to unmute yourself. I got you.
I go by both.
Okay.
For a little while there, I was introducing myself to people in person. I still do as Caleb, but once the channel got going, I was happy to bring back my old childhood nickname. So I will respond to either.
Okay, Bob the Baptist. I've put his channel address in the comments, and we'll talk a little bit about what he does and how he does it, which is very unique. But you let me know when I first contacted you a couple of months ago that you're a big fan of Dr. Hart's work and it had been important to you. So before you even give us the rundown of your, as we like to say, authentically broken faith journey, tell us how you ran into Dr. Hart, who is sporting pastels tonight, minty.
I dressed up. If you watch the channel, I dressed up a little bit more than I normally do.
I'm glad you wore a shirt.
Yes, sir. What was the question?
Oh, how'd you run into Dr. Hart?
How did I run into Dr. Hart? It's one of those things when you read enough of someone, it's like, when did you come across Machen? When did you come across Van Til? When was the first time you heard Calvin? I'm not exactly sure, but I know when he became pretty important to me, Dr. Hart. You can call
me Daryl, but anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll pray about that.
There's a Baptist answer.
It actually, I just remember when he became a very important source for me to lean on. It's, I think, the very first thing I ever uploaded, or it might have been the third or fourth, but that was before I took YouTube very seriously and wanted to make content on a regular basis. I found a bunch of like articles that he had written on the Presbyterian controversy of the 1920s, the fundamentalism controversy, and just some of the things that he had written. I read his book on faith and politics. Anyway, I was making a video. I came across a lecture by Richard Mao. I think that's how you say his name. And he pitted Kuyper and Hodge against one another, as Kuyper was the creative theologian, but Hodge was the confessional theologian, if I'm remembering correctly. And that kind of got me on a trajectory of thinking of like, okay, how do we? So my video was titled Orthodoxy or Unity. And I set out for 2 or 3 weeks to just like, I mean, I don't know how many hours I spent on that script, but just reading tons and tons to try to figure out what the answer to that question was. The answer I came to the conclusion of was yes. Orthodoxy or unity, yes. But in the midst of that, I couldn't find any other clean story than the Presbyterian controversy of the 1920s. I'm sure there are other stories, but that was the cleanest one I could find. And it was Daryl Hart's work on Machen that to me helped kind of. Is that too long?
No, that's fine.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. If that was
so Machen, no, that's the Machen horn. We sound that one.
Yeah, okay.
It's okay.
I just relied on him extensively. I couldn't find anyone else that knew as much about that controversy and that spoke so lucidly about it. And so ever since then, that kind of set the tone in some ways for the rest of the channel. Not that I agreed with every single thing that Hart had said or that Machen's views were, but there was something that stuck out to me that Machen said, if I must be considered a fundamentalist, let me be one of the highest stripe or something along those lines. And that really stuck with me as how do we engage with these issues? We have to engage with them as confessionally reformed people. And so that was when Hart started, I would say, for me.
All right. Well, your method of presentation in your videos note this, Dr. Daryl, he has a script. He works on things beforehand. We don't do that. We just go.
Because if I don't, I'll ramble.
Oh, well, we do that. Yes, we got that. So you typically have your microphone attached to a household, a utensil or item of some kind. That's one thing I'll warn people.
Band-Aid box? Wasn't it a Band-Aid box?
Not a Band-Aid box. The last one was a Dove Men Care soap box.
That's right. That's right. That was even worse.
Well, as they say, strong enough for a man, made for a woman.
Yep.
That was my pickup line in college.
So,
I watched the light switch turn on in real time. That was awesome.
Dr. Hart used to make a lot of moisturizing. He used to mention, of course, he hit being a cranky old man before I did. So his skin was flaking off. Now mine does that. So I get where he was coming from about 10 years ago when he talked about moisturizing all the time. Do you remember those days?
Oh yeah, I still am a metrosexual. So
I don't think they have those anymore.
I know.
Yeah,
that's another thing that went after Trump came. But
yeah, well, and some people would say some of the new Calvinists fit that category, but neither here nor there. So what spurred all this was a video that Caleb Bob the Baptist did a week or two ago, maybe more than that. The dark New Calvinism's dark trajectory, and what you may or may not know, Caleb, is that Dr. Hart's been talking about online New Calvinism and the For the City crowd and Tim Keller for well more than 15 years, probably pushing 20 years. A lot of Dr. Hart's critics, who think he's some like me now, we're raving liberals apparently, don't know that he was criticizing some of the things they don't like when they were still. I started to say when they were still dating cheerleaders, but none of those guys ever dated a cheerleader.
No, exactly.
I'm pretty sure. But anyway, when they were didn't even have a driver's license, most likely. So that's what we're going to talk about. New Calvinism. Really, we're going to talk about old New Calvinism, or early New Calvinism. Let me give a little, just my own quick history. I became a Presbyterian in 2004, and I didn't really know about New Calvinism. I just knew about, and this will resonate with Caleb, I came in through the kind of the founders movement in the SBC, and I knew John Piper existed, but I didn't care for him very much. I didn't learn about New Calvinism until I became a Presbyterian, because people started telling me about Tim Keller, who I'd never heard of. And I don't, the Gospel Coalition started, which really the Gospel Coalition is a website and a conference. That's all they are. They started in 2004. But what really directed me to try to figure out Tim Keller and the New Calvinist was Dr. Hart's blog, as far as I know, probably starting back around 2005. So I guess, Daryl, tell us your interest in all this. When did you? Of course, you worked in seminaries. You saw these things coming.
Right.
You knew the early forms of them. But what do you remember about the old New Calvinist days?
Well, I guess when I was a PhD student doing research at Westminster Seminary in the Machen Archives, Tim Keller had his office downstairs in the basement where the archives were, and we would exchange greetings and a little banter here and there. And then when I became librarian and taught church history in 1993, Keller had left to begin to plant Redeemer, and he came back regularly, and he was then, and it sort of he backed away from it later, but as futurologists, if that's the right word, but he's making all these projections about the way cities were going, the way global history was going, where the church needed to go. And it seemed that my colleagues were kind of in awe of these projections. And it wasn't as if I necessarily thought they were inherently wrong, but I just...
And you like cities. You're going to retire to one. You're going to go from a small town to a big city when you retire.
I just spent 4 weeks in Philadelphia and had a wonderful time. Philadelphia may not be everyone's cup of tea, but still, it's a fairly big city. And it just seemed like, no offense, and it's hard to speak about someone now who's deceased and give proper kind of respect, but it seemed like a lot of hot air. And that was my initial reaction. And then it just seemed like, as Keller then finally began to write books and then really took off, it just seemed to me that there was a lot of hype. And for whatever reason, I have a kind of BS detector for hype. And it doesn't mean that the hype necessarily is BS. Don't get me wrong, but I do think people can overdo it. And part of what seemed to me that allowed people to overdo it with Keller was he was in New York City, and people think New York City is, like the city. And wait, John Piper, wasn't he in a city? Doesn't Minneapolis count as a city? No, it doesn't compared. So it just seemed way off. And I still think there's something off about the New Calvinist movement, even after, as Gospel Coalition tries to wind down from the old days of Keller and Piper, who's still alive and kicking, and Carson. I guess I'm not sure how active he is, but there's a Carson Center there on the online, but uh, but there was also, even before that, there was Reformation 21, the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, and they had a conference in '96 in Boston, and it allowed John Meether and me. I hope John doesn't mind my bringing this up, but it was great. I mean, we had this great trip to Boston paid, and there was a Winslow Homer exhibit at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which was one of the best exhibits I've ever seen, except for the Sargent exhibit in DC in like 2004. So we had a great time, but we were there, and they came out with a statement. I can't remember what it was, but it was in the kind of origin. It was sort of pointing toward the kind of concerns of the Gospel Coalition. But I remember, I mean, Meether and I both didn't sign it because he didn't think it was ecclesial. It was sufficiently rooted in the church. And Keller also didn't sign that statement, but he went on to then help with the founding of the Gospel Coalition. So that's part of my background.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that it didn't seem ecclesial, because that's always been my problem with the Gospel Coalition, is that because they're so broad, they can't really, anytime they try to get controversial or specific about polity, it becomes a big controversy. Sometimes they'll have, this side and that side. Arguing for female deacons a few years ago was a Baptist, and it made some Presbyterians mad, and some probably thought it was great. But they're always on thin ice when they're talking about polity. So, Bob, you're much younger than any of us. Maybe not that much younger than Resby, but I mean, you weren't operating when New Calvinism started. But how do you know what you know about it? I mean, you were pulling out some deep catalog cuts in your piece, and how did you learn? I mean, have you applied yourself to learning about it, or what's your experience with it?
I mean, it's deeply personal. It's part of. I don't know if you guys saw my Young Restless Reformed journey, but for those that didn't, it was very much. I'm trying to remember the very first encounter, I think, was with Paul Washer's Shocking Youth Message. I could be wrong, but I think that was the first, or one of the first.
Is that the official name of the sermon, the Shocking Youth Message?
I believe so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of how it's lived on in the annals of YouTube history, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was that, and then I didn't put this in the video, but another moment was when I was graduating high school. I became friends. This was totally God's providence. I'm not going to bore you with the story, but it was kind of just total happenstance how we met. And then we started talking about C.S. Lewis and then hit it off. We're still best friends to this day. That guy sends me a sermon. I just remember it was the week of my graduation for some reason. And I listened to a sermon by John Piper. I think it was on John 17, but it may have been another passage, but I'm pretty sure it was from John on God's love for the elect. And I think I listened to that week 5 times, and then I was hooked. I mean, from then on, and but I also recounted how most of my senior year, in class, anytime I had a second, I would work ahead on schoolwork so that I would have time to listen to in the computer class that we were in. I'd try to see if I could get enough time in the class left over after I did my work to listen to an entire Mark Driscoll sermon or an entire Paul Washer sermon. So I was there from, I wouldn't say the beginning, but how I outlined it as the second wave. I kind of jumped in.
You started early.
Mid to the end of the second wave and wrote it and was there when Driscoll fell, but I wasn't like too emotionally attached. The only thing about Driscoll that I remember I really got attached to was a sermon about Jesus sweating drops of blood, praying in the garden, and just what he said. He screams at the congregation, "God hates you," and that just really, I was like, oh, but a lot of these sermons, a lot of those sermons like that, they were very, I'm not going to say shock jock or fire and brimstone per se, but they were their own kind of, they were like a cousin to that kind of thing. It was very much in your face. And that was where the masculinity aspect of my piece came in.
Okay.
Or like, I think that a lot of young men really liked being talked to like rough, like, hey, listen up, young man, you got to get your stuff together. And so that was kind of, I became a Calvinist because I believed it was true. I read Desiring God. And then when I graduated high school and I went to a Calvinist church down the road from my charismatic church that I was, I realized I couldn't turn the entire charismatic church into confessionally reformed church as a year-in Calvinist.
What?
You are correct, sir.
We need like a breaking news bulletin update on that.
So once I realized that, I said, okay, here's a Southern Baptist church down the road, established a denomination. They're Calvinists. So I went there, and like the week of at that Bible study, a young man leading the Bible study, he's like, hey, we're actually about to break into the Institutes. And I'm really glad that the Lord allowed me to get into something old that early on. That way I could, and I did. I read the Institutes with that study. And what I was going to say something else, but yeah. So I met my wife at that church, actually at that Bible study that night. We became friends and we're just in the leadership group at the youth group, but it became so much a part of who we were that it became more than Calvinism. I listened to all of Piper's Roman series and just devoured, the doctrines of grace. As much as he got wrong, got a lot right. And so I am grateful for that, although there were some idiosyncrasies I had to kind of leave behind. But me and my wife, both when we got married, we were Christians. We had difficult backgrounds and we were also Calvinists. And so Calvinism kind of became like a foundation for even us as a couple. And so when the Young Restless Reformation, I didn't bring this up in the video, how do you locate the online activities of people who were discovering the doctrines of grace together? The Reform Pub, where do you put that in my three waves that I outlined? I'm not entirely sure, but I know that was, and that's how the internet is. Like, it just kind of happens to you. And so we're just like discovering all these other people at these conferences and in these online Facebook groups, all these other people who are discovering the doctrines of grace. And we were in the Reformed Pub together, me and my wife, and and to the point that when we go into ministry, that was a thing together. And she's not a pastor. Let me make that clear.
Yeah, and if we didn't make it clear, Bob's a Baptist pastor.
I'm not a pastor anymore.
Oh, okay, you're not.
I can outline that real quick if you want.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, you're a Baptist. That's really all we need to know.
Yeah, but I was an associate pastor at a church and a Hurricane church. So that's how that cookie crumbles. But the whole thing was just, and even down to starting the YouTube channel, Calvinism was bigger than just Calvinism. It was, the doctrines of the Bible, and it was so much a part of who I was. And then my wife's part of the story is that she actually grew up in that Calvinist church, and she didn't even know she was a Calvinist. So somebody was like, "Oh, you're a Calvinist." She's like, "What? What's that?" And then they were like, "Oh, it's this." Oh, okay, I guess I am.
So Resby did some time in the Baptist church as an Acts 29 type. Resby, any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I'm trying not to have some of the PTSD flashbacks. There's always multiple waves of like what you go through in evangelicalism or whichever. Like I remember when the Purpose Driven Life came out, and it seemed like every single church was doing their entire sermon series that summer on Purpose Driven Life. And then Driscoll's Real Marriage had kind of like the same effect. So it's always like one of the and I don't know, maybe yours did, maybe it didn't. Like a lot of like shared experience is when you got to that chapter in the Real Marriage sermon series, and it was just kind of a question of like, if I really think about it, I don't think we went to church that Sunday for myriad reasons.
Might have saved your marriage.
It was probably a really good thing in retrospect. Wise man once said, "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Elwood." So, there's it's just providence all the way down, as Fletch would say. But it was such an interesting time, and I think looking back on it now, you could kind of tell that it was more of a thing. Like it couldn't have gone on forever. But it was sort of almost like, surfing or anything. Like, we're going to ride this as long as we can, and hopefully we don't fall badly. I said it on another podcast. Like, I'm grateful for it insofar as it got me to where I am today. I think you can kind of look back on those old experiences, but and I've still got some very close friends who are still very involved and probably owe the success of their ministry and missionary journeys to X29. But
how did you get out of the Young Restless Reform movement? Would you think?
We hired a commando team.
Again, Providence would have it is when you're at I hesitate to use Young, Restless, and Reformed. I will say that I was at an otherwise very solid Calvinist Baptist church at the time, and had a great relationship with the pastor, and it was a great place to be. But you have a kid, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I think we should baptize him. And suddenly, your wife unexpectedly comes to agree with that as well. And it sort of gives you sort of your diet of worms moment of like, or I'll say like a Martin Luther moment. It was like, I have to do something because if, it sort of moved us. So, I texted a buddy of mine who was a student at Westminster Escondido, and I was like, I have to find a church. What am I looking for? And he told me the abbreviations to look for, and most importantly, the ones not to go to. And as luck would have it, there was one very close. And, that I think that was 2013. So coming up on, 13 years later since I left.
Yeah, you're all in now. So,
can I say how I got out?
Oh, you were in X29 too?
No, how I got out of how I left the way I say it is how I left the restlessness behind.
Oh, okay. Yes, please.
Was Mark Jones and Joel Beakey, their work, his work, Antinomianism, Knowing Christ, and then I was like, well, I'll go read the other book he wrote, and that was when I found Joel Beakey, Puritan Theology, and that was halfway through that book. I was like, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this. So, and it wasn't that I, like you said, Resby, I'm grateful for it, and I don't even know if I was conscious that I was leaving it behind, but I started becoming aware of the Puritans and then also the Dutch tradition as well. And I was like, okay, this was more meat for me to sink my teeth into. And then I just want to add, shout out to eventually when I graduated Bible college, I found Tom Hicks, pastor of First Baptist Clinton, Louisiana. I asked him to mentor me, and that really, and I would say, we can circle back to this later, but I would say that is a lot of the issues that you see, I think, in the manosphere, especially the Christianized version of it, is it's a lack of mentorship and father figures. And so these guys go to online spaces to find a brotherhood and, a camaraderie that they're not getting in real time. And I'm just so grateful that not only did I was getting a very decent education at Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary, but I was also being trained by Tom Hicks. And I almost went to Westminster Escondido, but for various reasons, ministry and other things like that, I decided to stay where I was and be mentored. And I really think it helped me kind of simmer down and get some of the negative aspects of New Calvinism out of me.
Okay. So as for your thesis that there's a connection between New Calvinism and some of the things we see today, well, I'll let you describe it. But looking back, I think nobody was surprised when the resurrected Mark Driscoll 2.0 began to glom on to some of the new Christian right, Christian nationalist, manly man, he-man, woman haters club of the internet. That should not have surprised anyone. And I don't know if he's moved on a little bit, but a year or two ago, he was certainly trying to get on the team. That shouldn't have surprised anyone, but you've made this connection between various parts of New Calvinism and what we see today. So just lay that out. You did that in your video over 15, 20 minutes, but you can give it to us here in condensed form without the histrionics if you want, but however you want to do it.
You want me to flash GIFs and clips on the screen? And
let's see. I have a few. I have. Let's see if this might describe some of the things we've seen. Maybe I deleted that one. Well, just while I'm going through, here's an oldie but a goodie. That's young Daryl, Hart,
yeah.
and that was a live look at Mark Driscoll. By the way, his career.
It was actual footage.
Yeah.
Man. Wow.
But anyway, tell us. Explain to people why you think. History repeats and rhymes and echoes and all that. But tell us how you think New Calvinism brought us to where we are today.
I think at the very least, we could say that young men were attracted to what appeared to them to be heavyweight doctrine. This is an activity of the mind, at least. Doctrine, of course, needs to go to the hands and the heart, but at the very least, it involves the mind. And I think I kind of brought this out with Matt Chandler. I got some hate for it, but I think it's pretty clear. It's the same reason that people are attracted to Ben Shapiro is because of his intellect. Even though at the time when Ben Shapiro was rising, you had your Jocko Willink and your Joe Rogan, but people were attracted to Ben Shapiro, even though he didn't look like those guys. He was real smart and he could hold his own, in the rink with another interlocutor. And I think that was like very appealing to young men. And that gets to, I think also the attraction to the conservative movement as a whole. Just as an aside, people are attracted to the idea, like to them, the left has seemed to be very much like censor, heavily scripted. But the conservative, I don't know, aspects of the conservative movement, especially online on YouTube and X and stuff like that, these guys are willing to go and hash it out. And I think you saw, in my opinion, that was very attractive. It was attractive to me. I can say that at least at my personal experience level, that you have men that are willing to, go toe to toe with someone else that's going to challenge them and have to think on their feet. And I think that's a very masculine thing. I think Matt Chandler exhibited that. And then, of course, Mark Driscoll, it's right there. He wore it on his sleeve. He would wear Jesus is my homeboy and stuff like that. Like that's, we would have a problem with that. But what was he doing? He was pushing a taboo. And that was also seen as, that cultural transgression was masculine. You're not going to buck, or you're going to buck against when people tell you to get in line, you're going to say, no, don't tell me what to do. And that was also seen as, oh, you're carving out your own, path for yourself, those sorts of things. And so I would say that about the Young Restless Reform movement. I don't know if Dr. Hart, if you've done any work on that in the past, or if you've noticed that, but I know that for myself, me and most of the people that I was attracted to Calvinism with them, it was a masculine thing, in part. But it's not
different than what we see today. But you're saying there was still the masculine appeal, but it was present even in New Calvinism. So, Dr. Hart, any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Caleb, how old are you?
I think I'm 32.
Okay. I mean, I'm fascinated by the manosphere aspect of what you're saying. I haven't really thought about it that much, even though the course I'm teaching this semester on post Cold War America and the work, a little bit of reading I do in social psychology, which talks a lot about differences between men and women during this period and the effects of social media and smartphones on that. I'm more and more convinced of that, and the more I hear, even from women, even from feminist women, about what feminism has done to men, it's not part of my experience as a boomer and as an old man yelling at the clouds, as I get called many times on Twitter. Um, I just don't. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and Presby, you may be like this yourself. You're a little bit younger than I am, but I mean, I had a dad. I had people at church who I respected. Men. They weren't necessarily manly men, but they were men, and there were, sexual differences mattered. I had guy friends, both Christian and non-Christian, and I knew what guy culture was like in those spaces. Um, and so but it's not as if I've only been associating with people who are boomers. I mean, I've been teaching young people throughout my whole career, and you can only talk about so much in the classroom. You don't talk about a lot of personal stuff, but I just don't know what it's like growing up as a young man in the 90s and the aughts and beyond. So I'm fascinated about it, but I don't really have a lot to say. And for anybody watching, this is our new cat, Chessie, little Chessie. She's little.
Uh,
Dealey died back in April, and Chessie is kind of our replacement. But um,
I think
so it's actually kind of fascinating to me. But I mean, in the theological world, church world, like the men that I was listening to were R.C. Sproul and John Gerstner and James Boyce at the Philadelphia Conference on Reformed Theology conferences in Philadelphia. Can you believe it? They were in Philadelphia, but um, and they weren't coming across as men. They were just theologians, pastors, preachers wearing suits, and it just seemed like the categories of men and women made sense. And there wasn't anything online. You didn't have to present yourself online, and you had to worry about how you related to women and whether you could relate in a certain way that you could go out with them. Didn't mean you had pickup lines necessarily, but still you kind of
well, Resby did, of course.
exactly.
Resby.
yeah. And
So,
with varying degrees of failure up until one finally worked. I think and I hate always having to bring it back to this, but especially since I think the events of 2015 into 2016 were so shapely for just like the way the nation approached culture, but also the way we look. Um, I think what we would have described as a manosphere prior to Trump riding down an escalator in 2015 is very different than how we think about it now in light of that, because so many people formed an online identity, after that or in reaction to it, in spite of, because of, however you kind of want to frame that. Because like me being considerably younger than you, not a dig, Daryl, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that was my experience growing up in suburban Southern California. Was at a conservative leaning mainline church at the time, and was surrounded by all different types of men, from construction to chemists to a youth minister who I had a great relationship with, and still friends with his family to this day. And like you said, it was a matter of like cultivating those relationships in such a way that one day you wanted to find a suitable mate and kind of live your life peacefully and out of controversy. And the emphasis has certainly swung on that. And I think what Bob was saying about, the there was always that chord that was like well struck of like men speaking to, boys turning into men at that point. Where it's like, wow, no one's ever talked to me like this before. And that was a powerful thing. Like someone really caught lightning in a bottle and then realized that if you hired dozens of ghostwriters to your website, if anyone wants a really deep cut on our show, there's one for you, that you can actually be quite financially and publisher successful in ministry based on that.
You saw Paul Washer do this a lot. And I'm not even sure how aware of it he was, just to what you were saying, Rusby, that I remember right when I was finding the Young Restless Reform movement, I was also watching, I said earlier, watched tons of Mark Driscoll, tons of Paul Washer, and half the videos that I watched from Paul Washer were two young men and talking about, and they were, a lot of them were good. It was talking about, being a man of prayer, being a man of the word, leading your family. But he would also talk about how he would take his son out bow hunting, and he would teach him how to do hard things and work hard and stay faithful, stay patient. I also wanted to add, I don't think that a lot of people recognize that a lot of these young men that were discovering Young Restless Reform, or I should just say Calvinism, the doctrines of grace in the new Calvinist movement, they were coming from limp-wristed churches that were theologically shallow. And so there was go ahead.
Let me ask this. Were they also coming? I mean, I grew up really sheltered. I've thought about this before. My mom had 5 brothers and sisters. My dad was an only child, is an only child. Not only did I have nobody in my immediate family, including, aunts and uncles, who ever divorced, I didn't know anyone growing up who had ever, I didn't know any families that had broken up. And credit to my Southern Baptist upbringing. I was in churches where the families were great and people stayed together and kids grew up normally. But your generation, you probably hardly knew anybody with an intact family. I know the world's changed, and I think that's got to be one of the reasons that, in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of, and even now, people are looking for something, but what they're finding is not always good for them, I don't think.
And to that point, I think, or in addition to that, I would say that's why figures like Paul Maxwell resonated so much with a lot of young men, because there was still a lot of feminist influence in Christianity that had seeped its way into certain outlets, like even Desiring God. If you look up Paul's old videos, you can see him talking about things like, why is Big Eva so effeminate or something like that. He had multiple pieces on this, and he talked about, Paul Maxwell had actually written for Desiring God, and he noticed that a lot of his readership was mostly women, and that the blogs, but I guess functioning off of maybe the model at Christianity Today, I'm not exactly sure, but there was something that they were still functioning off of a certain way of thinking. And Paul, being a young, I think we might be the same age. I'm not sure. Maybe he's a little older than me. But when he was coming in, he was a graduate of Westminster, Philly, and I think his PhD at TED's. Well, he starts up and coming, and he started noticing that trend, and so he started, I think, capitalizing on what the Young Restless Reform movement was, or New Calvinism was able to do in attracting young men. I failed to mention the cigar smoking and beer as well. Like that was a part. It was that cultural taboo. It's like that. This is what men do together. So it attracts those men with some of that performance or some of those aesthetics, but it also did have, a huge appeal to women still as well. And a lot of these publishing companies are still trying to market toward women. And so what I think you start to see happening, and maybe Mark Driscoll coming on, maybe that was part of it, was addressing the men in the room. And so I just wanted to point that out, that was there. It's not to say that it was a totally masculine movement. I mean, there were tons of women involved and women were impacted, but that there was a core in it that appealed to young men. I think it at a root level was that intellectual side. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what it was. Like kind of similar. How do you see like Steven Crowder prove me wrong? He's going to go on this college campuses, and it was Calvinism was this like we're going to own the Arminians kind of thing. But because New Calvinism was so focused on doctrine, my case is that they start to look somewhere else than New Calvinism for more advice on how to be men, and that's where the manosphere part comes in.
All right, so I think I remember you saying in the video that they weren't getting everything from the New Calvinist, so they began to look to I don't know, sort of pagan or secular figures. I guess there were some back then. I'm not sure who they all were, but yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So this is very tricky and very complicated, and I don't pretend to be an expert on this issue. But I'll just again appeal to my experience, because at that point, I think right around that time, I start feeling a restlessness that's continuing, and it really just has to do with calling, my own masculinity, being excellent at something, risk taking, starting businesses, like those types of things. As you get older, you're getting married, they start to come up. But what I did instead, and I'm not patting myself on the back here either, I'm just explaining my story. I'm not exactly sure how it happened. I really can't remember. But somehow I end up in Tom Hicks' office and begin that mentorship process with him. Another little aside here.
Well, he's just sort of a normal pastor, right? There's nothing flashy I've seen him online, but you got hooked up with someone sort of normal. Maybe that was your problem. Yeah.
Seriously. So, as an aside, I just want to say I also have excellent friends to this day. When I was in high school, instead of drinking and partying, what me and my friends did was make metal music together in my friend's garage and just hang out. And we watched horror movies, ate pizza, and just played metal. And then we all were saved, and we would go and play music at bars and stuff. We wouldn't drink, but we would hand out Bibles. And
you were straight edge.
With that experience, I think like it gave me a sense of brotherhood and camaraderie, which coupled with, mentorship, men need fathers and brothers, I think there you go. What a name.
He's one of our favorites. I'll send you a link to one of our greatest shows ever involving DB worship guy, but yes.
So I know that at that time, when I start moving in that direction, again, getting more into Reformed theology, reading more widely, and with those friends, with those friends that I grew up with, I'm also watching other guys establish YouTube platforms around the same time and comment on, quite frankly, the very legitimate woke left infiltration into at least the SBC. I can't speak for every denomination, but there were some real funny things going on in Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary and things like that. Some of these YouTubers come on the scene, they start commenting on it as students, and just pastors and ministry. Acts 29, Joe Webbin started in Acts 29. Well, no, he didn't start in Acts 29, but he's ends up in Acts 29, and so as I'm following these guys and I'm listening to them, I become obsessed with listening to these guys, because I recognize that they have so much of my YRR background, but they're not going in the same direction I'm going. They're getting angrier. It seemed to me like they were trying to find ways to keep the restlessness alive, whereas I felt like I was calming down and becoming more confessionally settled.
Yes, I think that's where I was trying to go, just to make it all about me. Like when I talked about Trump coming down the escalator,
that was a big moment.
Something happened where people stopped trying to get unrestless or trying to or they stopped trying to be restless.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was like, no, I have to want to fight all the time.
Yeah.
So to recap, it's all Driscoll and Trump's fault. That's pretty much what we've gotten to so far.
TLDR.
Yep, there you go. That's
QED.
the show. That's
Did I
the
use
show.
that right?
Yeah.
And I just want to wrap up that point about Joel, and I appreciate that, Resby, because I really think that's an important piece of it, that the young restless reform movement tapped into the restlessness of youthful men.
Well, and anger over COVID too, figured into all this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It got weird.
And
It got weird.
That's like Will Spencer said, that's an accelerant in all of this. It just like blows everything up, I think, really, really badly. But a lot of those things had already been going on. I was already watching Joel Webben before that, but COVID definitely didn't help. And that'd be an interesting other piece to do, with Joel Webben before and after COVID. But the same kinds of things are still going on. I saw it also with theonomy. I thought that people were going to theonomy not long after they had kind of came and tasted and seen new Calvinism. They were like, all right, what else? And so they go to theonomy. And my theory was, and still is, that they're keeping the restlessness alive because of that. Whoever said it, yeah, go get them, and then there was, 2016, that was a big thing. And then COVID. But I wanted to say that there was the first time I had ever heard any of these guys acknowledge the plight of young men. It was, I don't remember who he was talking to, but I was listening to Joel Webben at work because that's what I did. I've been watching Joel Webben for a very long time.
I didn't know he'd been around that long.
Yeah. I can't remember when this was, when I'd heard him said this might have been around 2019, I think. And he said, he was basically explaining why people liked Andrew Tate. And I had never heard a Calvinist, Reformed, Baptist, whatever, claims to be Orthodox pastor show so much interest in the Manosphere, Red Pill, Andrew Tate thing. Maybe there's, Manosphere is just a good term because it captures the internet phenomenon of different anxious, angry young men. And when I heard him say that, I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then I continued to hear more people talk like that. Like there was another podcaster I heard talk about the Nazi that comes to the church, or the neo-Nazi, or the Nazi sympathizer, or the white racist. If he comes to the church and he has racist views, and he specifically pitted that against the woke left black woman who hates white men. And the way he framed it was, well, the church has for so long been catering to this side, the left side, and not the right side. And I thought that was interesting. And he tried to be careful in how he said it, but I was like, how far do you push that? Because it sounds like you're pitting these two against one another, these options for pastors for who they get to choose to minister to. So essentially you have this one class over here, they claim to be disenfranchised, and the church has for too long been ministering to them. So now we need to begin to minister to this group. They feel like they can't afford anything. They can't hold down a job. They can't find a spouse. OnlyFans is ruining their lives. And so we need to minister to these men. And yes, they may have some bad views, but how are you actually going to call them to repentance? And it's still an interesting question to this day, because I think that as things have developed, you saw this, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Antioch Declaration situation, but essentially Joel Webben has a guy, joking about the Holocaust. And it's like, well, what you see him doing is what that podcaster had said, is he's now standing on behalf of this man who is a victim, Joel is claiming, and we need to minister to the victims, don't we? And you take the victim category in scripture, that, the oppressed, and say, well, we're just going to apply it to this class instead of this class. And I thought, that's going to be interesting to see how far you can push that envelope when you're picking and choosing which victims to favor. And so that phenomenon and how I bore it out in the video, because it was the most official thing that I could find, is the same kind of phenomenon you see when you see men like Michael Foster see Anthony Johnson's 21 convention as an opportunity for evangelism. Well, now he's going to go in and witness to these guys. And my thinking with Will Spencer, who I wish was here with me, was when evangelism comes close to association, because now you're coming into this movement, you're trying to witness, you're saying, and we believe you. You're trying to witness to these men, but there is the issue of audience capture, because now, because what the 21 convention was designed to do was to unite the manosphere, which was made up of a bunch of influencers, male influencers, who are trying to tell
Many
young
of whom
men,
were pagan. Many of whom were
many of
pagan.
whom were pagan, who are
So,
trying to tell young men how to get their lives together. And when you go into that, this convention is literally designed. One thing it's designed to do is to share audiences. So when you get the young men and you bring them over, you know, oh, they're converted. When they bring their views with them, how do you deal with that? And are those things spiritual issues? Does
yeah,
that answer your question?
yeah, but something that just occurs to me, and this brings us back to New Calvinism, and I think Dr. Hart will have something to say about this. Um, I believe it's something that we've criticized Keller for, and to people that we like to call transformationalists, who would be at least slightly left of center in the PCA and in the SBC. I mean, there are all these Redeemer type churches in the SBC. It's hyper contextualization. When you when you're trying to adapt your preaching and your worship and even your church structure, which we see in the PCA with non-ordained, we don't ordain deacons in some churches, and we fudge with the titles and the roles, and we get right up to the edge of egalitarianism because of the context. So I think probably what you're ultimately saying, Bob, is that they were contextualizing, and the context began, which was the manosphere. That context began to shape them far more than they shaped that target audience. And all of a sudden, the audience became so important. They want clicks, they want followers, and I think they just kind of, maybe some of them fell into that. But Daryl, you'll have to unmute yourself. What do you think about the contextualization aspect?
I think it relates to what I've been thinking for several minutes. And it also is partly what strikes me about the exchanges on Twitter about Christian nationalism, and the generational divide. I guess I wonder if there's an expectation for the culture, for the world that Christians inhabit, to be Christian all the way through. And that I mean, okay, that doesn't quite fit contextualization, because you're looking at what's other and you're trying to adapt Christianity to it, but that there is a sense still that there shouldn't be this divide. And for whatever reason, and I grew up a fundamentalist Baptist, but the men that I looked up to in a way, beyond my father and men at church and some of the theologians, I had Paul Newman and Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, and before that John Wayne and Cary Grant. I mean, there were these Hollywood stars who kind of embodied masculinity. And I'm thinking even more recently, and I'm thinking even of what Resby has thought of this, but Resby, Brad, and I share an affection for The Wire, which is hardly a Christian expression, but there are a lot of men in that, and it's like, okay, those guys are being manly, but they're not trying to be manly in the based way now. That's almost 20 years ago. And I'm thinking also of Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm, where you also have manliness that in some regards today would be considered toxic, but it's like, okay, I can get my manliness over there, and then at church, I'm not expecting to to do that there. I'm going to be a different kind of man there. And why can't the two worlds kind of coexist? Sure, I'd love for Larry David to become a Christian, or Jerry Seinfeld or whatever, but I don't, I mean, it does seem like there's this desire for a unified world. And yes, I hope I long enough for other people to convert to Jesus, but I still think there's like this other world that has all these great things in it, Jewish comics and whatever, that I benefit from. Um, but I don't see that enough. It seems like some of the guys I interact with online, the youngsters, they're fairly sheltered. They just don't know about a world beyond Christian social media or something. It's hard for me to believe that's the case, but I wonder.
And a lot of these guys love natural law and natural nature.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well, in nature, God gave us John Wayne. What's so bad about John Wayne?
right. But I mean, so then why can't we have a non-Christian prince or government? I mean, why does it have to be Christian? Um, that's just one application on the Christian nationalist front. But and the manosphere stuff, it just seems to me that there's a kind of just simply being provocative about it. I mean, one of the delights of Curb Your Enthusiasm is that I mean, Larry David is observing all this kind of highly feminized world that he has to interact with, which Seinfeld doesn't have to do as much with because he's not married. Sure, there's Louis Dreyfus character, but it's still a fairly manly world between Costanza and Kramer and Seinfeld. But now in Curb, Larry and Jeff both have brides, and they have to worry about that, and they're sort of complaining about that feminized world, and they carve out spaces within it. So there's a way of kind of expressing your manliness without having to necessarily be based.
Well, there was this goes back to my early days as a Calvinist. My sort of the bridge from being Baptist to being Presbyterian was Martin Lloyd-Jones, and he was very wise and insightful. And
what, we couldn't book him tonight?
No, we've had him on
episode.
before. But one of the most powerful things I ever read from him, and I think this touches on what Daryl and Bob are both saying, is that there is no Christian personality type. But I grew up, we sort of got the impression, as I did as a Baptist, that there was a Christian personality type, and we were all supposed to act the same, and it became feminized.
Yeah.
The music, the sappy hymns, the Fanny Crosby. I remember pastors in prayers. They would say precious all the time, and I hated that. But they thought that's the way they were supposed to be. But I think Daryl's point, which some people may miss, is that we don't all have to be the same, and we don't have to act. We don't have it's pietism. One of my pastors I've heard him say before, I hate pietism, and this guy is way over. He's to the right of me on anything, but he's right about that. We can be different. We can experience a lot of different aspects of life, and we don't have to. We are Christians all the time, and in Christianity, our faith should inform what we do, but we don't have to conform to some Christian personality type. And I think with some of the Christian manosphere guys, a lot of them talk and act the same, and they've created an echo chamber for sure. And I think what I would say before I forget is that even if you didn't have a good father, even if you came from a broken home, the best place, and I'm sure some of these guys would agree, But the best place to kind of learn about life and normalize yourself is in the church. And, that church, I'm going to write about this. One of the casualties of the Christian manosphere, Christian nationalism, culture, that ethos is contentment is not a thing. Contentment would actually be frowned upon. The expectation, we've got to make this country Christian tomorrow. You've got to do these things. Godliness with contentment is a great gain. And the church that you're in is not going to be perfect, but you can be content there. You can be content with what God provides for you. You've got His Word, and you've got these local churches, which may not be very exciting, and they may not do anything that really gets your juices flowing. But Paul said he learned to be content and take the long view, and not always be trying to change every aspect of the world. And that's what I wanted to say before we ran out of time. But Bob, you were nodding there, so I used to say that the problem with evangelicalism is that it was predicated on constant change. It was hard. That's where we get in that respect, the young restless and reformed were very much like evangelicals. They were and are, I think. I think we want more of a slow church with realistic expectations for the church and for the society. But do you agree, Bob, that contentment is a casualty of the church, of what's happening now?
Yes. I've
Well said.
read a number of times that a lot of these guys could read Jeremiah Burroughs' The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment and digest that. I just, 100%. And just kind of off topic, another thing I was going to say something, but if you had another question or something.
No, go ahead.
I was going to try to pivot and ask you guys, do you think that it is wrong for these pastors to look? Now, I would say, in my opinion, it's wrong to pit the victims, the black woman or the white man, against one another and say that we have to pick or choose which one we cater to. But do you think, what are your thoughts, Dr. Hart, on is there any legitimacy in what the manosphere influencers are scratching at in terms of saying, hey, yeah, it is hard to afford things right now. Yeah, it is hard to find a girl. Yeah, there is a lot of wokeness in the church, and you are rightly frustrated about such and such, but it's not that those things are completely illegitimate or those frustrations are illegitimate, but it's the response to those issues. That's the thing, maybe scratching even at the contentment part of what you were saying.
No, I think that's fair. I do think I'm happy a lot of days of my life that I'm not a young man anymore and having to navigate a world and even find a wife in this world. It was I have no idea what the whole app world, dating apps and beyond that are about, and I can't imagine what that would be like. I did meet my wife at church, and but back in those days, you could still meet a woman at a bar or at a dance. She wouldn't necessarily be a Christian woman, but she might be. And with another way in which the internet and smartphones have affected our lives. And the whole victim.
I still think that's one of the best memes is, as we look back on, or as we look at online dating and dating apps, it feels like we all caught the last chopper out of Saigon.
Exactly. And the victim, I do think I've become convinced more and more that, and a number of people are writing about the way education, the way we've been at least structuring public schools, a lot of programming to encourage girls and women, and the effect, the toll that has taken on boys and young men is true. Although again, in the classrooms that I've been in for the last 30 years, I haven't necessarily noticed that. I'm not sure what I would necessarily see in the classroom. What I might see at the dance on campus or something else, it might be more evident. But to hear, um, I mean, a woman who taught at Harvard, who does research in some sort of natural science. I heard her interviewed recently, and she was just saying that we have ruined young men. And she's a feminist, she's a liberal. I mean, so, and she lost her appointment at Harvard over some of the stuff she was saying. People in her lab rebelled against her. So, I'm convinced that that's an issue, but I don't think necessarily that the Christian manosphere is the is the proper response, and not just because I think these guys are being jerks, but I can understand clicks and maybe even subscriptions, and there's money in it, and I wish there were people who were more skeptical of online stuff and the way people might act out in certain ways to gain followers and clicks. Said from somebody who's still trying to get back over 1,000 followers after having my Twitter account hacked. No, I'm not jealous, but still,
I'm jealous for you. I saw that. This is not right.
Well, you talked about behavior. More and more, I've come to believe that being a huge a-hole is just a sin in and of itself. And if the media that we have, X, Twitter, even YouTube, being a jerk is like it's helpful. I mean, it almost guarantees success, and that doesn't.
I have a little anecdote about that.
Go ahead.
Recently, I don't use AI a whole lot, but just a few months ago, I was like, trying to figure out, always as a YouTuber, trying to figure out how do I get more views, and I spun this script to Grok, and it was like, you need to be more aggressive. It literally told me that.
Well, but so people who are used to watching us, they're going to watch you, and they're going to think, "What in the world's going on?" Because you're pretty high energy and aggressive too. So that's weird that it would tell you to be more so.
In the words that I put into the chat, it came back that I wasn't mocking enough. I wasn't being, calling names enough and those sorts of things.
That's unbelievable.
And I got into an argument because I was on the phone with it. I was talking to it. I was like, I'm a Christian, Grok. And it was like, oh, I understand. I was like, you don't understand. I hung up. But I thought that was interesting. And that's actually why I do some of the, over the top stuff, is actually because I kind of refuse to mock and bully. And I know I fail at that, but I try not to. And so, but you have to keep people watching. And so unless you're doing super solid work and being very entertaining, the lowest common denominator, easiest thing to reach for is I guess being an a-hole, like you said. Like if you just do that, like that'll get clicks, if you're not trying to be creative enough to think outside the box of how can I get people to keep watching this without doing that.
It's very much like some of these IFB guys, like Phil Kidd and Tony Hudson, some of these independent fundamental Baptist kind of shock jock preachers. There's nothing new under the sun. They've been doing it for a long time. Dr. Hart knows that Billy Sunday and one of who Machen was actually fairly friendly to, and Robert Speer, who was one of Machen's nemesis. They were sort of proponents of this masculine. What did they call it, Dr. Hart?
Muscular Christianity.
Muscular Christianity, yes. So there is nothing new under the sun, but maybe technology is aiding and abetting some of this bad behavior. And we'll see where it goes. I mean, how many people who have recently become anti-Semitic? I mean, what's the next step from that? To just and are the manly men, are they more normal at home, or what we've seen? I don't know about Dr. Hart. I've seen three large I've seen a lot of people. I'll just say this: I've seen a lot of people whose large families have been destroyed by followers of Doug Wilson. When it becomes all about submission, guess what? Nobody can submit enough for some guys, and it's pretty obvious what some men are motivated by. Sometimes I'll see some of these guys in the manosphere, and I worry about if they have a wife. I worry about her. What's it like at home if you're like this online? Some of it's fake, some of it's for effect, but we'll see in 5 or 10 years, and I'm afraid what we see may not be good. Some may mature, some may age out, but you just don't know. It's a rough time, and if Dr. Hart and I have a problem with this just because we're old, Fifth Commandment's still a thing. You can't hate us because we're old.
Well, on that point, was somebody going to say something?
Just to follow up briefly on the a-hole problem. I mean, Machen's contemporaries thought he was an a-hole. They did. I mean, he was based in his time, and okay, you can sort of do some kind of historical regression analysis or something and say what's based then needs to be based here. It's like inflation or deflation or something. But there are ways to be based. There are ways to be an a-hole. That there are ways to be provocative that are more fitting than others. And I guess there seems to be have been more of a sense of that in previous generations. Another reason why I admire a writer like H.L. Mencken, who also admired Machen to a limited degree, but I mean, Mencken wrote books with the title Prejudices or Calumny. It was called Damn, a Book of Calumny. He did not hold back, and yet it wasn't just a tweet or two. It was a whole essay or a collection of essays. Meaning that there was something thoughtful about it rather than simply the shock jock value.
Yeah, he wasn't spastic
No.
and random.
I'll
go ahead. We're about up to the time you said you needed to get done. So
we can go to 10 minutes over since we started
okay.
10 minutes late.
All right, no problem.
I was going to say to what you were saying about what's worse, the Jews. I don't actually know the answer to that question. I think something will happen before that. I think, but that's another conversation for another time. But I do think that what you see here is you see a development of that restlessness, and what Christian nationalism is able to do, as I said, is give, whether right or wrong, intellectual reasons as part of a Christian system, whether or not it is, but its claim is that it's an entire Christian political theology. And so it's able to take some of the elements of the manosphere, see the end of Stephen Wolf's book, and locate them in a system that makes people feel like it's historically justified, which is rooted to the Crusader memes and things like that, where it's like, oh, okay, so this is actually an age-old problem between, the Gentiles and the Jews, or whatever, however they frame it. So what you're seeing is, they become part of this movement, and then the movement wants to answer the question, who is our enemy? If we're going to go fight, well, you need an enemy. And you see different people saying, oh, well, it's, it's immigrants, it's women, it's blacks, it's Jews, and it's some people, or the left ideologically, it's the left, that's the enemy. And no matter how close to the truth any of those may be, I think all of them fail to miss the bigger enemy, and we're in it, and it's
us.
Well, yes. Oh my gosh, yeah, we're sinners. I think it's kind of it's a little bit us, and it's what is acerbating us, or the problem in us. And I think it's something like the ring. I actually think that this is what Tolkien was getting at. It wasn't the atom bomb itself or any one technological advancement, but it was the idea of industry itself. And I think that the cell phone is just, a representative of that idea, but it's the bigger picture of the machine and industrialization. I think that the enemy is the machine, which is an idea that I want to develop more in the future. Not that any of those groups listed we can't have conversations about that, but I think that we're making a bigger issue out of some of those things than the context that we're in, and that is this the cloud and the machine. And I think that you were kind of getting at that, brother, there just a second ago. I just wanted to point that out, that I think that that's actually the enemy that we need to be talking about, is the internet. And if we're going to do the internet, we got to do the internet, but we just have to be self-aware about how dangerous it is. It's like the ring. It's like Boromir looking at the ring and saying, oh, we can use it. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but we have to realize how dangerous this is. That was one thing I was going to say. And then I was going to say something else, but go ahead I want to hear what Dr. Hart has to say about that. Okay.
I mean, I guess where this could go beyond. I mean, I do worry about the disuniting of the United States, and what form a civil war could take, and whether Christian nationalists will eventually have to take a side in some kind of civil strife, and be surprised that the other side isn't using rubber bullets. I'm worried about the kind of polarization that's going on, especially right now in Minnesota. But it's not merely there, and I don't see the Christian nationalist contribution to whatever discussion is going on as being particularly helpful in calming the antagonisms.
Yeah, and let me say before I forget, I've made this pitch online, if you on Twitter, or maybe in a Substack post before. But you can have all sorts of opinions about society and Jews and race and minorities and the left and the right. But if you're a church officer, how you hold those views and how you express them can be really important. As far as I know, the church is still open to all sinners, and we welcome them all. We don't welcome all their ideas, certainly, but I think a lot of people, especially if you're anonymous online, you can say or do anything that you want. And I might agree with some of the things I read from time to time, or see an element of truth in them. But as a church officer, and I would think certainly for pastors, and there are a few in this, that are pretty. You mentioned Joel Webb, and there are other people who are not. It looks like they're trying to reach one group or welcome one group, and I just thought, as an officer in a church, I don't want to erect any barriers. Just if a single mother comes, if an immigrant comes, I'm not talking about aiding and abetting crime. None of that. It's just we've got to be very careful if we love the church more than we love, our platform and our opinions. And Christian nationalism in the manosphere become a sort of prosperity gospel. They become it's power religion or power ideology, and nobody wants to hear about pilgrims and strangers. I said privately to someone today, we as Christians, as pastors, elders, we're preparing people to die and for the hard things in the world. We don't have, unless we're Joel Osteen, we don't have we don't have a hack and a magic formula for people to avoid all the trouble in their life or necessarily to fix society. It took us a long time to get here, and it's probably going to take us a long time to get out if we do. And I remember, I don't know, somebody said it a long time ago, and I think it could have been in the Southern Baptist Founders Conference, and they've sort of shifted on this now. But the only hope for any country or community is the church, is good churches and people becoming Christians. And there's no magic formula to make that happen, and it's not a quick fix. So I wanted to get that out.
Dr. Hart, I wanted to say, I should have said this at the very beginning. It's an honor to meet you, brother.
Well, it's nice to meet you too.
I've been so influenced by your work, and I just really appreciate you and what you're doing. And I have a ton of questions. We could do it part 2.
Yeah.
I just interviewed Dr. Hart because I have tons of questions, but I have 2 that I was going to ask you. You can answer one or both of them and take as long as you want, please.
Sure. I mean, it's nice to meet you too, and especially so after so recently. I mean, your video about New Calvinism got on my radar somehow about 10 days ago. So here you are. Not in the flesh.
I sent it to you. That's how I got there.
No, it was even before that, Brad.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
That's how wired I am.
Good. I wanted to ask you 2 questions at least. What kind of Christian nationalism existed in Gresham Machen's day, and how did he interact with it? That was, I guess those are actually 2 questions in one. And then I had a second question. You want to go ahead and ask now?
Let me answer that. And Brad knows this story well. He's written about it a lot too. I would say it's the social gospel, is this Christian nationalism in his day. They're trying to Christianize America. It's been going on from the 1860s after the Civil War on to the 1920s. And Machen is very critical of it in, I think, fairly subtle ways, sometimes explicit, sometimes indirect in Christianity liberalism, but also other places. And his defense of the spirituality of the church is a way to push back on that. Aside from his own politics, which were Southern Democrat libertarian, which don't really line up. They used to line up with conservatives before 2015, oftentimes, but that's no longer the case. So that's a short answer. Are you going to say anything more, Brad? Go ahead.
Well, I just, if we had a Christian prince in the teens, his name was Woodrow Wilson. He was a Presbyterian ruling elder and grew up a pastor's son. And he took his Christianity seriously. Just happened to turn out to be a social gospel and, sort of an internationalist utopian thing that went wrong. But Machen didn't. Machen was his social equal and acquainted with him socially, but he had no use for him. He could see that ultimately when societal transformation is your goal, doctrine is going to suffer. It just is. And when, ecumenism is also very dangerous. They were looking for one big super church back then to Christianize and more important, to Christianize the country for utilitarian means, to clean up the dirty immigrants and to defeat communists. That was a common goal. But Machen talked about how he hated. He and his mother agreed that they hated what was then called, after World War I, 100% Americanism. and it's almost exactly what we see with Christian nationalism. And someone, tweeted, I think it was a subtweet of me, Machen's not the only social thinker or political thinker in the Reformed tradition. That's certainly true. But Machen brings about he brings up some very inconvenient ideas and truths that a lot of people just don't want to hear today.
Can I say something to that?
I'll shut up. Yes,
I have a second question, but very briefly, I'll say Machen wasn't the only social thinker. C.S. Lewis was. And C.S. Lewis was brilliant on a lot of these issues. I think he's being overlooked by a lot of the Reformed. And I've been digging into him lately and recasting. Maybe this can be a cliffhanger because I desperately want to do maybe one of these a year with you guys. I really enjoy this and having the opportunity to pick your brain on these things. But seeing his mere Christianity as less a theology for a local church or an individual Christian even, but maybe something even social. But I want to think through that more in the future. But not I don't know about Christian nationalism, but maybe a mere Christianity. But go to Lewis. There's a lot there too. If you don't like Machen, go anyway. But I have another question for you, Dr. Hart.
All right.
I think you're going to like this one. What is your favorite tobacco? No, I'm just kidding. You can answer that if you want, but my question is, what does the church lose if it loses Machen, or if it ignores or dismisses Machen as a whatever? Oh, there you go. We need one that says Baptist on. What does the church lose if it loses Machen, brother?
Well, I think it loses a clear sense of its priorities. The church does. And I think Machen had those priorities in view. I mean, it just seems so kind of simple and cliched. And people have not appreciated spirituality of the church. Back when I first started reading about it in the 80s, people were critical of it because, it was the cover for slavery somehow. And there's certainly some truth to that argument, but you can't dismiss it entirely as that. And it's simply an idea that the church needs to use the vernacular of our time to stay in its lane. Harvard came out with a statement a couple of years ago that after all the wokeness and the Palestinian protests, and after Claudine Gay had to step down as president, the university was going to do academic stuff. The church is going to do church stuff. And Hollywood celebrities need to do celebrity stuff and not make statements about Venezuela or whatever. But people, and again, the internet, social media feeds this. Everybody has a platform now in ways that they didn't used to have. And so they can give their opinions about all sorts of things. And if they're socially prominent, they can do that. But I think the churchmen, church officers really need to be careful about doing that and making sure that they speak on things that are biblical, what Scripture reveals, or implications thereof, and what the Constitution of the church allows. Of course, individual members and officers as citizens of, there are other parts of our lives. We're not only officers or church members, but keeping straight what is the Christian aspect of the church and also of Christian lives, as I think something that Machen really understood well and practiced.
Well, he was extremely politically aware. He testified before Congress against the the Department of Education. He wrote letters to the New York Times and other papers. He wrote letters to the mayor or the governor of Pennsylvania over blue laws. But he was church first. So the question I would leave people with: can you be we hear a lot about America first now. can you be America first and church first at the same time? I'm not sure you can. So I think the best way to describe Machen was church first, but he did care about culture and government, but he was still church first. And I don't think a lot of these influencers, and maybe in this imaginary online world, church first is not a thing.
I have so many more questions, but that's we're getting past time. So
Yeah.
thank you guys for the opportunity to come on here. Can we do this like every now and then?
Yeah, we can do it again. Absolutely. We have to. We have to fill this content hole with something, Bob. So,
well, like I said, I plan on doing more work on some of this and incorporating your work, Dr. Hart. And I know we're going to disagree from time to time on some things, but I think that's a really profound question. Church first. I love that. I think it's a good note to end on.
All right, Resby, why don't you thank everyone, and more wonderful music on the way out.
Oh boy, a musical outro. Thanks everyone for watching and listening along tonight. Fantastic show, conversations as we depart into. Well, I'm going to sleep after this at least, but somebody's got to work in the morning. But as you drift off to sleep, you pet the dog, you pet the cat, and kiss your significant other goodnight, and just whisper sweetly, softly in their ear, "Don't be an Erdman."
Start a new way. Sing a new song on a new day. A new heart, and only Christ can give a new heart. And what a change, my friend, there will be. It's a breakthrough to a new life. It's a breakthrough to a great life. And we have a breakthrough to a new world today.
What's wrong with you people?